Well, hello, drivers. This is Big Ed with Big Ed's Trucking News. Hey, have you seen the latest funny? I saw or it was a picture. Anyway, there's a bunch of signs and it said, no through traffic, no through trucks. It's a dead end. Swift, this means you. We used to joke about Swift, but I call him not so swift. But anyway, it's a little funny. It seems to me like every time I turn around, you'll see a Swift driver driving over the top of a fire hydrant or knocking down a pole or, hitting a bridge or whatever. But I saw this one and it said, it literally pointed out the fact you can't go this way. And here is this is in West Virginia, up in the hills. No place to go. This guy got that truck up on that single lane dirt road. How in the hell are they going to get that thing out of there? I've seen the same thing. I don't know if you drivers are familiar with the Shasta scales up in Dunnigan, or let's see, where the hell that's, anyways, by Mount Shasta in California on I-5. And the scales are open. And there's an old country road back behind the scales. And every time you turn around, there'd be some driver that decided he was going to go around the scales that way and find themselves all screwed up. Anyway, I saw where they're building a brand new TA Express, 30 miles east of Shreveport, Louisiana, going to have 50 spots. 50 spots, big deal. When you think about all the parking problems that we have in the United States, and they're going to sit there and give you 50 more spots, well, that's 50 more than they had. I remember before they ever built the Loves or the Pilots or all these different truck stops, and I was sitting there, back in those days, we would think about how, there's a lot, parking was kind of tough. And this is like in the 70s, early 80s. And all of a sudden you've seen the TAs come about and all the different truck stops. And you say, man, that's a cool truck stop. And man, the next thing you know, that truck's plumb full. Every time they build a new truck stop, it don't take very long before that place is packed. You can't even get in and out of it. You take the Loves down here at Emerson, Georgia. Whatever exit that is. What is it? 283 on I-75. Man, that place is a nightmare to get in and out. So then they built another brand new one up at exit 310, brand new Loves. They're at Daresville, Calhoun at Daresville. And you can't hardly get in and out of that one. But anyway, it says now the government's going to get involved. Boy, the three scariest words from the government. We're here to help, right? Anyway, new parking. We're going to have to, figure out what to do with all this parking. It's going to the Senate. Well, by the time they get done talking about it, it'll be 3 or 4 years from now. And if they ever do anything, which I doubt, other than writing drivers tickets for being on the overpass. And speaking of overpasses, New York is raising awareness of bridge strikes. Bridge strikes are up, 50% in the state of New York. I can remember the first time I ever drove up 95, up through New York City. And the sign right there says 12'6". And this is the way the company's telling us to go. And I'm on the radio, I say, hey guys, what the heck, what's the deal? He says, well, just get over in the left lane and don't look up. And I'm at 13'6". And I'll tell you what, man, you could feel the vacuum of the truck when you went underneath that. There couldn't have been an inch space going underneath that thing. Can you imagine if it had been a little bit of snow? That's why this driver don't go to New York. Or at least I haven't been up there in a long, long time. But anyway, I was sitting there and I'm looking at that, these different strikes. I've seen drivers, if you look at, when you're coming up to a low bridge, you think about it. If it says like it's 12 foot high and you're going to try to go underneath that, you think about every time that you've come up to a bridge that was even 13'6", you think that bridge is coming right through your windshield. And yet drivers will smack right into them things. Anyway, Washington State, the Department of Transportation, their online service where you buy your permits and all that kind of good stuff, well, guess what? It was hacked by a cyber attack. Can you imagine the information that somebody could get a hold of while they're in there? Think about all your DOT numbers. You think about all your personal information, your Social Security. They say, oh, but you can go ahead and get your permits, come in and, do it by hand. Yeah, that's going to help a guy if basically somebody got in there and got all his information. It says cargo theft is up by 59% in the third quarter. Well, imagine that. People don't have jobs. The economy is in a dumper. What do you think is going to happen? Here we go. In they talk about in the same article, they're talking about how trucking is going to remain the dominant freight mover for the next 10 years. Like, no kidding. Who else? You think you're going to move by rail? I mean, how many times you think about UPS and all these overnight outfits? You can do that by train? Of course it's going to be the dominant carrier. And if they think they're going to do autonomous trucks, I mean, think about this. They're still going to have a driver in the seat. Who's going to back it in the door? You think that computer's going to back it into that door? I don't know. It'd be interesting to watch. But can you imagine an 18-wheeler going down the road, 80,000 pounds, and all of a sudden that computer goes haywire? Just a question. Here we go. You've seen those BCB trucks, right? Out on the highway. They're blue trucks out of Texas. Well, come to find out right now, it says they just got bought by CRST. You know what we used to call CRST back in the day? Can't remember. Trucking. I got a name for all these because I've been doing this a freaking long time. Speaking of UPS, there was a UPS driver lost his life. Can't remember where it was, in Indiana, off I-65. There was a guy, a convict or whatever, he was fleeing the police. Anyway, got in a wreck with this UPS driver. He's just out there trying to do his job, and this guy's trying to evade the cops. It cost that driver his life. Winter driving. Listen, drivers, winter's coming. Like I spoke to you in the last video, you got to take, extra precautions. You need to slow down. But here's the other thing. Think about, especially if you're pulling a reefer, and you get up into freezing temperatures, 20, 30, 40 below zero, you better get some anti-gel in those tanks. Now, I know a lot of engine manufacturers, I think Cummins, I don't believe that I think they'll void the warranty if you put that, some of that antifreeze, diesel in your tanks, anti-gel. So make sure you check with manufacturing. Make sure you check with your company before you start dumping that down in your fuel tank. Back in the old days, I remember when I was a little kid, we were up in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I might have been 6, 7 years old. But overnight, out in the truck, it was like 10 below zero. Hell, them old farmers went out there and built a fire underneath the oil pan. Heat that truck up. And another old trick they used to do, and I don't recommend doing this, but an old trick they used to do is they put a gallon of gasoline in the fuel tanks to help break all that stuff up and get things going. And that's old school stuff. And speaking of old school stuff, how many times have you heard of drivers out there, especially guys like my age, sit there and go, the good old days? Let me tell you something. Those guys, you know what? They're living in some kind of fantasy land because I don't remember any good old days. I want you to think back. Well, a lot of you drivers probably don't remember it, but I can remember driving trucks that didn't have air conditioning. You'd be out there 115-degree heat. You're going down the highway and you got a spray bottle and you're spraying it on your face to keep yourself cool. Good old days. I've driven trucks that the heater didn't even work. Old cab overs, you sit there and take the pad off the top of the old cab overs over the doghouse, where the engine was just underneath you. You're sitting right next to the engine. And we used to have to change or check the oil. You had to pull that pad back and reach down and pull the dipstick. It wasn't in the, there were some trucks that weren't in the front of the truck, in front of the old cab overs. They were right on the doghouse inside the cab. We used to pull that thing back and open that thing to get heat in the truck. I can remember wrapping blankets around my legs to keep from freezing to death. Yeah, it was the good old days. Grinding gears and going down the highway. I like a lot of these drivers. I've heard them complain all the time about these automatics. I remember when the automatics first started coming out, yeah, they broke down every now and then. But I'll tell you what, when my wife was driving, One thing the automatic transmission did, it gave her about 4 or 5 more years of driving because she got to the point where she just couldn't push the clutch in all the time, especially in heavy traffic. That extended her career at least 4 or 5 years. Me, I couldn't care less about shifting gears. I learned to drive a truck and with a 5 and a 4. And I've driven 18 speeds. I've driven about everything you can think of. I've driven a truck that had a 5 and a 3 and a 2-speed duplex. Of course, you won't see one of them very often anymore. But there is an old driver up in Humboldt County, California. I'm not going to say his name because I ain't got permission to say his name, but that old boy been around a long time. Got himself an old Pete conventional. It's got transmission in it just like that. But anyway, the good old days. Yeah, I remember the good old days of freezing to death and burning up and clutches you could barely push in, Armstrong steering. I remember this one old truck I drove with 150 for a company called Don Nolan Trucking back in the day. And that didn't have center point steering. It didn't have power steering. It had 1-to-1 steering. And that truck had spent more time on its back than it did on its tires. Just saying. That was a tough old truck to drive. But anyway, the good old days. Here we go. Governor Kemp is going to cut the gas tax and the fuel tax. Now, it's been a while, but now, I thought he did it some time ago, but I was just reading an article today where they're going to cut the gas tax and the fuel tax because everything's so high until the 29th of November. Well, that probably helped for a little while. What's it going to do after that? Houston is going to restrict 18-wheelers from smaller streets citywide. They're going to come up with truck routes inside the city. That's going to be a cluster screw before they get all done. And they're going to fine you if they catch you down in there. Just another way to take money out of your pocket. But I got to understand, and think about drivers that actually live in some of those smaller streets, take their tractor home, owner-operators. That's going to be a pain in the butt. But anyway, there's an 85-year-old law that restricts drivers from getting overtime pay. Well, they're getting ready to repeal that law. Now, you think about what's going on in the trucking industry right now. Times are tough. Fuel prices, freight, everything is tough right now. And now they're going to go ahead and eliminate the overtime pay? I wonder what unions got in there and decided that squeeze some politicians to do that. Sure, everybody should get paid with their work. There's no doubt about that. And there's times when drivers, you think about this for a second. How are they going to figure that out, overtime pay, when you're sitting? A lot of us got detention pay for sitting after X amount. It's just going to create a whole nother level of problems in the trucking industry, and it's going to cost some drivers their jobs. Just like anytime the minimum wage goes up, it costs a certain amount of people. We're talking about entry-level jobs. It's going to cost them. It's going to cost them wages. Here we go, Conway, Arkansas, out there on I-40. A truck going down the highway, and guess what? It's one of the boom trucks, a lumber truck, but it's got a boom on it to help, take the, out of job sites and stuff. Anyway, the guy didn't put down his boom and took out the overpass or one of the signs going across the highway. I was sitting there looking at that going, holy mackerel. But that ain't nothing. I-44 in Oklahoma. Guy did the same thing, overhigh truck, and literally took out the whole freaking bridge. Who knows how long it's going to take to repair that? I've seen guys with, hauling those end dumps, forget to put the dump back down, crunch. Anyway, Dello Oil. Good old Dello. Dello's been around a long time. Anyway, they're getting ready to eliminate all of their conventional oil. So whatever you buy is going to have to be part synthetic. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what they're about to do. Anyway, I hope that you enjoy these videos. I'll bring them to you as often as I can. And listen, I worked for a company in Georgia for a long time, Kennesaw Transportation. Now, they're not paying me to do jack baloney here. I'm just saying that if you're looking for a good job for team drivers, it's a good company to work for in Rydal, Georgia. I'll put their phone number. You want to get a hold of Kelly Jones in recruiting and tell her Big Ed sent you. You guys drive out there, stay safe. Until you see me again, this is Big Ed's Trucking News.